Now let's go over for loops. For loops are similar to while loops in that they are used when you want to execute a number of lines of code repeatedly. But a for loop is usually, it doesn't have to be, it's usually used when you know exactly how many times the loop that you're writing must be executed. You can still use a while loop in these scenarios, but it's more intuitive if you use a for loop. It's also easier to use a for loop, and it makes it so that you make less mistakes when you're on the exam. A for loop has three parts in its declaration, and they're each separated by semicolons. The three parts are the initialization, the test condition, and the change occurring to the initialized variable. Let's look at an example for loop right here. As you can see with the while loop, a for loop begins with its corresponding keyword for, and then a set of parentheses. However, in these parentheses, we do not include a Boolean or a Boolean expression, because a for loop is not like an if statement where we can include a Boolean, or a while loop where we can include a Boolean to run some lines of code some amount of time. Instead, we have these three parts that we mentioned. What are they? Well, this is the initialization step. Here, you can see that we're initializing a variable called I, and we're assigning it the value 0. And then we have this semicolon here. So wherever you see anything separated by semicolon, you know that that's where one part ends and the next part begins. So this is the initialization. It might seem out of place that we're initializing a variable inside and not on another line, but this is valid Java syntax. Now let's look at this second part, which is, as you saw, the test condition. So what is this test condition? Well, this is very similar to what you saw earlier with the while loop. We had a test condition very similar where we said while, and then in parentheses we had, I think it was val less than 5, right? This was our test condition. It's very similar in this case, and it's used for the same purpose. I'll explain in depth a bit later, but know that this is very similar to the test condition you write in a while loop. And then lastly, we have the change that we're doing to the variable, I++ in this case, meaning that we will increment I each time we go through the loop. Okay, so how does this work? Well, let's go over it. So we begin by looking at the variable. It's assigned the value 0, as we said. Now we go into the loop. We don't look at this stuff. Let's ignore it for now. We go into the loop knowing that I is 0. And we execute all the code inside the for loop. In this case, it's just one line. And we're just printing out the statement, hello for the ith time. So what would this be? Knowing that I is currently 0, we just print hello for the i0th time. Now, here's where the for loop differs a bit. Since we've executed all the code inside of the set of curly braces that define the for loop, we execute the change condition. Right after all the code is completed, we execute the change condition. What is the change condition? Well, the change condition is incrementing I by 1, I++. So now the value of I is no longer 0, it's 1. I is now 1. Okay. Since I is now 1, here's where the test condition comes in. You'll notice that this is very similar to the while loop, because now we're literally just checking whether I is less than 5. Is I less than 5? Yes, it is. I is less than 5. So the program will come inside the for loop and execute all the lines of code again. It follows the same process. It will now print hello for the 1th time, and since that's the only line of code in the for loop, it will now head to the change portion, and it will now increment I by 1 again. I will become 2. It will assess the test condition. It still passes the test condition since 2 is less than 5. It will now print hello for the 2nd time, and I will come again, get incremented to 3. 3 is still less than 5. It will print out 3, and basically you will notice that the order is very simple. You first look at the variable. Since it's 0 in this case, you see whether it can pass this test condition. 0 is less than 5, so it does pass the test condition. So you go inside the loop then, You execute all the lines of code, and then you come back and you look at what this statement is. This statement, just imagine it being at the end of all the code. What it basically does is this change condition occurs at the end, all the code inside your curly braces. So here's the order to clarify again. First, look at the variable's value. Second, see if the variable passes the test condition. Third, run all the code inside the set of curly braces. And fourth, go ahead and do the change condition. So you'll notice that even with all those different factors, the for loop still functions relatively the same way. We start off with the first step. We look at the value. We assess whether it passes the test condition. Then we print out all the lines of we execute all the lines of code, inside the curly braces, and then we perform the change as indicated in the third section. This basically output to the console 3, 2, 1. And the point I wanted to make was you can do the same thing with a while loop. So instead of initializing the variable inside the for loop, or inside the loop, we're doing it outside this time. And it's the same initialization, just taken outside of the parentheses. And with the while loop, we have the test condition right here, with the test condition being identical to the one seen in the second part of the for loop. Then we have the line of code, and then we have x equals x minus 1, which is the same as x minus minus. So you can see all three parts of the for loop are at different places of the while loop. So this can give you a sort of mental understanding of how the while loop and for loop are similar.